The arrival. The wagon wheels slowed to a reluctant creak as they rolled into the quiet frontier town, dust rising in soft clouds beneath them. Clara Whitmore kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, her fingers pressed together as though holding herself from coming undone. She had imagined this moment differently, perhaps with anticipation, perhaps even hope, but instead there was only a hollow ache settling deeper in her chest. When the wagon stopped, the driver climbed down first, offering her a brief nod that carried more duty than kindness. Clara hesitated before stepping down, her boots touching the unfamiliar earth with a strange finality. This was it. There was no turning back. She lifted her gaze and saw him. Elias Boone stood a short distance away, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He was taller than she expected, broad-shouldered, his presence commanding in a way that should have comforted her. Instead, it unsettled her. His eyes moved over her quickly, not with curiosity or admiration, but with quiet assessment, as if confirming that what he had ordered had arrived intact. "Clara," he said, his voice flat, almost indifferent. She swallowed, forcing herself to nod. "Mr. Boone." A flicker of something crossed his face, annoyance, perhaps. "You'll call me Elias now." The correction felt less like an invitation and more like an instruction. Clara nodded again, unsure what else to offer. Silence stretched between them, thin and uncomfortable, before Elias turned away without another word. "Come," he said, already walking. Clara followed, her steps quick to keep pace. She had crossed miles of land and left behind everything she had known for this man, bound by a promise written in ink and expectation. Yet as she walked behind him, watching the distance he kept without thought, she felt as though she were chasing something that had never intended to meet her halfway. The town itself was sparse, weathered buildings, a few scattered figures moving about their business, all of it wrapped in the golden hush of late afternoon. It was quieter than she had imagined, lonelier. No one greeted them. No one seemed to notice her arrival. Elias's home stood at the edge of town, a modest structure with little to distinguish it from the others. He opened the door and stepped inside without hesitation, leaving Clara to follow once more. The interior was clean but cold, lacking any sense of warmth or life. There were no personal touches, no signs that anyone had ever cared to make it a home. Clara paused just inside the doorway, her eyes moving slowly across the room, searching for something, anything, that might soften the starkness. "You'll settle in quickly," Elias said, placing his hat on the table. "There's work to be done here." Clara turned to him, her voice quiet. "Of course." He nodded once, as though that was all he required, then moved past her. "I'll be out until evening." And just like that, he was gone again. The door closed behind him, leaving Clara alone in a silence that pressed in from all sides. She stood still for a long moment, listening to the absence of sound, before her shoulders finally sank. The tears she had held back since the journey began now slipped free, tracing quiet paths down her cheeks. This was not what she had come for. She wiped her face quickly, ashamed of her weakness, though there was no one there to witness it. Still, the feeling lingered, of being seen and unseen all at once, of existing in a place that had no space for her heart. Unable to remain inside, Clara stepped back out into the fading light. The air was cooler now, the sun dipping toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. She walked without direction, her steps guided only by the need to breathe, to find some measure of steadiness. It was then that she noticed him. He stood at the far end of the road, still and watchful, as though he had always been there. His dark hair fell past his shoulders, and his posture carried a quiet strength that did not demand attention, but held it nonetheless. There was something in his gaze, not intrusive, not judging, just present. Clara hesitated, unsure whether to turn away, but something in his stillness kept her rooted. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if sensing the weight she carried, he stepped forward. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice calm, steady. Clara let out a soft, unsteady breath. "I don't know." It was the truth, though it sounded strange, spoken aloud. His expression did not change, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. This place can feel that way. She looked at him, then really looked, and something inside her shifted. There was no expectation in his gaze, no demand. Just space. The tears returned before she could stop them. I thought, she began, her voice breaking. I thought it would be different. He did not interrupt. He simply waited, allowing her words to find their way, even when they faltered. Clara shook her head, as though trying to dismiss her own disappointment. I shouldn't be saying this. You can, he said gently. The simplicity of it unraveled her further. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to steady herself, but the emotion had already taken hold. I don't belong here, she whispered. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind moving softly across the land. Then he spoke again, his voice low but certain. You don't have to hide with me. The words settled over her, unexpected and profound. Clara felt something loosen inside her, a tension she hadn't realized she had been holding since the moment she arrived. She lowered her hand slowly, meeting his gaze with a fragile kind of trust. Who are you? She asked. He regarded her quietly before answering. Tala. The name lingered between them, simple yet grounding. Clara nodded, as though committing it to memory. For the first time since stepping into this unfamiliar world, she felt the faintest sense of steadiness beneath her feet. But as the sun dipped lower and the shadows deepened, she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever path had brought her here was not as simple as she had believed, and something had already begun to change. Fractures beneath silence. Morning arrived without comfort. Clara woke before the sun had fully risen, her body still adjusting to a place that did not yet feel like her own. The house remained as she had found it, orderly, quiet, and strangely untouched by warmth. For a moment, she lay still, staring at the ceiling, as if expecting something to shift overnight. Nothing had. She pushed herself up and began her duties without instruction, guided more by assumption than familiarity. The kitchen was sparse, its shelves holding only what was necessary. She worked in silence, preparing a simple meal, her movements careful, deliberate, as though precision might somehow earn her belonging. Elias entered just as the light strengthened through the window. He acknowledged her with a brief glance before taking a seat at the table. You're up early. Clara nodded, placing the plate before him. I thought it best. He gave a non-committal hum and began to eat. There was no gratitude, no criticism, only absence. Clara stood for a moment, unsure whether to sit or remain standing, before choosing the latter. It felt safer not to assume too much. Did you sleep? She asked quietly, attempting conversation. Well enough. The response was final, leaving no room for more. Clara lowered her gaze, her hands clasping together to steady herself. The silence that followed was heavier than before, no longer unfamiliar, but already settling into pattern. After finishing, Elias stood and reached for his coat. There's work to be done in town. I won't be back until late. Clara hesitated. Is there anything you'd like me to? Keep the house in order, he said, cutting her off without harshness, but without patience either. Then he was gone. Again, Clara remained where she stood, listening to the echo of the closing door. It struck her then, not the fact that he left, but how easily he did so, as though her presence required no acknowledgement beyond function. She moved through the day as expected, tending to chores that offered no resistance but little reward. Each task filled time, yet none filled the quiet that lingered behind them. The house, though clean, felt no more alive than it had the night before. By midday, the stillness became unbearable. Clara stepped outside, the sun now high enough to cast sharp light across the land. The town carried on at a distance, its muted activity offering little invitation. She walked slowly, her path uncertain but her need to move undeniable. Her thoughts returned, unbidden, to the previous evening, to Tala. The memory unsettled her, not because of what had been said, but because of how it had made her feel. Seen, heard, the simplicity of it lingered in a way she could not easily dismiss. She told herself, It had been nothing more than a moment of weakness. A stranger's kindness, nothing else. And yet, her steps carried her farther than necessary. She did not expect to find him again. But he was there, near the edge of town, where the land stretched wider and the noise of settlement faded. Tala stood beside a weathered fence, his attention fixed on something beyond her view. He did not turn immediately when she approached, as though aware of her presence without needing to confirm it. Clara slowed, uncertain whether to continue or retreat. "You walk like you're searching for something," he said, his voice calm. She paused. "I didn't realize it was that obvious." He turned then, his expression steady, only to someone who knows the feeling. The honesty of it caught her off guard. Clara stepped closer, her hands tightening slightly at her sides. "I shouldn't be here." "Then why are you?" he asked, not unkindly. She opened her mouth to answer, but the words did not come easily. Instead, she exhaled, her shoulders lowering in quiet defeat. "Because I don't know where else to go." Tala regarded her for a moment, his gaze thoughtful but never intrusive. "A place doesn't become yours just because you're told it is." Clara felt the truth of that settle heavily within her. She looked away, her eyes tracing the horizon as if it might offer clarity. "My husband," she began, then stopped. Tala did not press. "He doesn't speak to me," she said finally. "Not in any way that matters." The admission felt both small and immense. "He brought you here," Tala said, "but he hasn't met you." Clara's breath caught slightly at the precision of his words. "No," she whispered. "I don't think he has." A silence followed, but it was different from the one she knew at home. This one did not weigh on her. It allowed her to think, to feel without judgment. "You expected something else," Tala said. "Yes," Clara replied, her voice steadier now. "I expected something real. And what you found." She hesitated, then answered with quiet certainty. "An arrangement." The word lingered between them, stark and undeniable. Tala nodded once, as though acknowledging something unspoken. "Arrangements are easy to maintain," he said. "They don't require truth." Clara looked at him, her brow faintly furrowed. "And truth does. It demands more than most are willing to give." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than necessary, not with intensity, but with clarity. Clara felt it again, that unsettling sense of being understood without explanation. She stepped back slightly, as though needing space to breathe. "I shouldn't stay," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Tala did not argue. "Then don't." The simplicity of his response left her unsteady. He offered no persuasion, no reason to remain. Only choice. Clara nodded slowly, turning as if to leave. Her steps were measured at first, deliberate in their direction. But with each one, the weight in her chest grew heavier, pulling her backward even as she moved forward. By the time she reached the edge of the road, she stopped. Something inside her resisted the return, not to the house, but to what waited within it. She did not turn back, but she did not move forward either. For the first time since her arrival, Clara understood the truth she had been avoiding. She was not just alone in her marriage. She was unseen within it, and somewhere behind her, in a place she had no right to claim, was the only person who had truly noticed. The line that should not be crossed. The tension within the house no longer hid itself behind silence. Clara felt it the moment Elias returned that evening, not in what he said, but in how he moved. His steps were sharper, his presence heavier, as though something unseen had followed him inside. He removed his coat with more force than necessary, setting it aside without care. "You've been out," he said, not looking at her. Clara stood near the table, her hands resting lightly against its edge. "Only for a walk." "At the edge of town?" The precision of the question made her hesitate. "Yes." Elias turned then, his gaze narrowing slightly. "You'll find there's little for you out there." The words carried a warning beneath their surface, though his tone remained controlled. "I wasn't looking for anything," Clara replied, though even as she spoke, she felt the weakness in it. "See that you don't," he said. The conversation ended as abruptly as it had begun. Yet something had shifted. Where there had once been indifference, there was now attention, and it unsettled her more. That night, Clara lay awake long after Elias had fallen asleep beside her. The distance between them felt greater than ever, though they occupied the same space. His presence, once merely cold, now felt watchful. She turned her gaze toward the window, where the faint outline of the horizon barely touched the dark. Her thoughts refused to quiet, circling the same realization again and again. She did not belong here, not in this house, not in this arrangement, not beside a man who saw her only when it suited him. The clarity of it left her restless. By morning, the unease had hardened into something sharper. Elias left earlier than usual, offering no explanation, only a brief instruction to remain home. Clara nodded as expected, waiting until the sound of his departure faded before allowing herself to move freely. But she did not stay. The pull she had resisted the day before returned with greater force, no longer subtle, no longer ignorable. It was not curiosity that guided her now, but something closer to need. She walked with purpose, her steps quicker, her breath uneven. The town passed around her in fragments, voices, movement, life continuing as it always had. None of it reached her. When she found Tala, he was seated beneath the shade of a lone tree, his posture relaxed yet attentive, as though he existed in quiet balance with the world around him. He looked up as she approached, his expression unchanged, though something in his gaze sharpened slightly. "You came back," he said. Clara stopped a few steps away, her composure already thinning. "I didn't know where else to go." The honesty of it lingered heavily between them. Tala studied her for a moment. "Something has changed." She let out a strained breath, her hands tightening at her sides. "He knows I've been out." "That's not what troubles you," Tala said calmly. Clara shook her head, frustration rising. "No, it's not." She hesitated, then forced the words forward. "It's everything else." He waited. "He looks at me now," she continued, her voice unsteady. "But not because he sees me, because he suspects something." "And is there something?" Tala asked, his tone even. The question struck deeper than she expected. Clara faltered, her gaze dropping to the ground. "There shouldn't be, but," he prompted gently. She lifted her eyes, meeting his with a fragile intensity. "But I don't feel like I've done anything wrong." The admission hung in the air, both confession and defense. Tala remained silent for a moment, considering her words. "Feeling seen can make the rest of the world feel distant," he said, "even when it shouldn't." Clara took a step closer, drawn by something she no longer tried to name. "Is that wrong?" "It depends on what you do with it." His answer did not comfort her. It clarified too much. "I tried," she said, her voice tightening. "I tried to be what he expected, to make something of this. But there's nothing there." Her breath caught slightly. "And here, with you." She stopped, unable to finish. Tala rose slowly to his feet, closing the distance between them just enough to shift the air. "Clara," he said quietly, "you're standing a line." She held his gaze. "And if I've already crossed it, then you need to decide why." The question settled deep within her, stirring something she had kept buried beneath duty and expectation. "Because I don't feel alone when I'm here," she answered, the words barely above a whisper. The truth of it left her exposed. For a moment, neither of them moved. The space between them felt charged, no longer neutral, no longer safe in the way it had been before. Tala's expression remained steady, but there was a shift in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, of the same boundary she felt. "You should go back," he said, though his voice lacked force. Clara didn't move. "I don't want to," she replied. The simplicity of it broke something open. A breeze moved through the branches above, stirring the stillness around them. Clara felt it against her skin, grounding and disorienting all at once. "I don't know how to go back to being nothing," she said. Tala exhaled slowly, as though weighing something within himself. "And I won't let you become something you'll regret." His restraint only drew her closer. "You're the only thing that feels real," she said, her voice trembling now. The words should have been enough to stop everything. Instead, they pulled it forward. Clara reached out before she could reconsider, her hand brushing lightly against his. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it carried a weight far beyond its simplicity. Tala stilled, his gaze dropping to where their hands met. Neither of them pulled away. In that quiet, suspended moment, the line between what was and what should be blurred beyond recognition. Clara felt her breath catch, her heart unsteady as the reality of what she had done settled over her. Not with shock, but with a strange, undeniable clarity. This was a crossing, not marked by grand declarations or irreversible acts, but by something far quieter, the choice to stay where she knew she should not. Tala withdrew his hand first, the movement slow, deliberate. "You need to understand what this means," he said. Clara nodded, though her voice failed her, because she did understand. And that was what frightened her most. As the distance returned between them, it no longer felt neutral. It felt deliberate, fragile, something that could break with even the smallest step forward. Clara took a breath, steadying herself. "I don't know how this ends," she admitted. Tala's gaze softened, though his posture remained firm. "That's because it hasn't begun yet." The words lingered, filled with both warning and possibility. And as Clara turned to leave, her steps slower than before, she carried with her the quiet certainty that something irreversible had already taken root. Not in what they had done, but in what they now felt. The cost of being seen. The shift did not go unnoticed. Clara felt it before Elias spoke a word. An undercurrent in the house, subtle yet persistent, as though something fragile had begun to fracture beneath the surface. He watched her now, not constantly, but often enough that she could no longer mistake it for coincidence. His attention, once absent, had turned deliberate. It unsettled her more than his indifference ever had. That evening, as she set the table, she sensed his gaze linger longer than necessary. When she turned, he did not look away. "You found your footing quickly," Elias said. The remark was measured, but it carried an edge she could not ignore. "I've done what's expected," Clara replied carefully. He leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her as though searching for something beneath her words. "And nothing more?" The question hung between them, quiet but sharp. Clara met his gaze, steadying herself. What more would there be? For a moment, Elias said nothing. Then he rose, moving slowly around the table until he stood closer than before. The proximity felt intentional. "This town is small," he said. "People notice things." A flicker of unease moved through her, though she kept her expression composed. "There's nothing to notice." Elias tilted his head slightly, as if weighing her response. "I hope that's true." The conversation ended there, but the tension did not. Clara lay awake again that night, her thoughts louder than the silence around her. She understood now that whatever fragile distance had existed between herself and Elias was gone. In its place was something sharper, awareness, suspicion, and control. And beneath it all, a truth she could no longer deny. She had changed. Morning came with a clarity that felt almost harsh. Clara moved through her routine with quiet precision, but her mind was elsewhere, circling the same realization again and again. She could not remain suspended between two worlds, not without consequence. When Elias left, his parting glance lingered just long enough to remind her that she was being watched, even in absence. But this time, Clara did not hesitate. She stepped outside with purpose, her path already chosen. The sky stretched wide above her, the air carrying a stillness that felt almost anticipatory. Each step she took brought with it a growing awareness, not just of where she was going, but of what it meant. When she reached the edge of town, Tala was already there. He stood as he had before, grounded, unmoving, as though time had little effect on him. Yet when he saw her, something in his expression shifted. Not surprise, but recognition of what her presence now carried. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though his voice held no accusation. Clara stopped before him, her breath steady despite the weight in her chest. "I know. Then why did you come?" The question was direct, leaving no room for evasion. Clara held his gaze, refusing to look away. "Because I can't pretend anymore." The words settled between them with quiet force. Tala studied her for a moment, as though measuring the truth of what she had said. Pretending is often easier, he replied. It is, Clara admitted. But it's also empty. She took a small step closer, her resolve steadying. I came here thinking I was choosing something new. But I wasn't choosing at all. I was placed into something that never asked who I was. And now, he asked, now I have to decide what I'm willing to live with. The honesty of her words left little room for anything else. Tala's gaze softened slightly, though his posture remained firm. And what does that mean for you? Clara hesitated, not because she lacked an answer, but because she understood its weight. It means I can't stay with him, she said. The statement was quiet, but final. Tala did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice carried a measured calm. Leaving him doesn't mean coming here. Clara felt the truth of that settle within her, grounding her in a way she had not expected. I know, she said. This isn't about choosing you. The admission was difficult, but necessary. It's about choosing myself, she continued. For the first time, something close to approval flickered in Tala's expression. Then you understand, he said. Clara nodded, though her chest tightened slightly. That doesn't make it easier. It's not meant to be. A silence followed, but it was not uncertain. It held clarity, sharp, undeniable. Clara looked at him, her voice quieter now. What we've done, what we almost did, it matters. It does, Tala agreed. But it doesn't define what comes next, she said, as though reminding herself as much as him. Tala inclined his head slightly. No, that part is yours to decide. The responsibility of it settled fully within her. Clara drew a steady breath, feeling the weight of her choice not as a burden, but as something earned. I won't hide, she said. The words carried a quiet strength she had not possessed before. Tala's gaze held hers for a moment longer. Then he stepped back, creating space between them, not out of distance, but respect. Then don't, he replied. There was nothing more to add. Clara turned, her steps deliberate, as she began to walk back toward the life she intended to leave behind. The path ahead was uncertain, marked by consequences she could not yet see. But for the first time, it felt like her own. Behind her, Tala remained where he stood, a quiet presence that had altered her course without claiming it. And as Clara moved forward, the horizon no longer felt distant or unreachable. It felt open, not because she had found where she belonged, but because she had finally stopped hiding from where she did not. And whatever waited beyond this moment, it would be faced not as someone chosen for a life, but as someone who had chosen it for herself.